Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard, and today I'm putting on my historian hat and going over the top 10 untouched cards in Legends of Runeterra. Now what I mean by that is that I'm going to be ranking the top 10 most powerful cards in Runeterra that have never been nerfed or buffed. Most of the cards on this list have been the topic of discussion for nerfs by the community at one point or another, but Riot has never acted upon these requests. I do want to mention that I'm only including buffs or nerfs that happened in documented patch notes, meaning that anything changed from the first pre-beta weekend to the second pre-beta weekend is not actually documented, but the second beta weekend open beta is documented in the open beta patch notes. An example of this is that Glimpse Beyond is not disqualified because its change from burst to fast speed happened between the beta weekends, but Catalyst of Aeons is disqualified because its change from 4 to 5 mana happened from the second beta weekend into open beta. Now, in case you came here expecting me to say Kennen and Bandle City Mayor and Loping Telescope and things like that, I'm going to give you a little hint here and say that I have not put any Bandle City cards on this list, mostly because we've only had about 1.5 patch notes since the release of Bandle City. So with the region not being fully fleshed out, with it not having all of its core sets, on top of the fact that we've really only had one patch for any card from the region to get changed, I just didn't put any Bandle City cards on this list. Kicking things off, we have an honorable mention, actually, with Brightsteel Protector. When I was putting together this list, there were 11 cards that really stood out to me, and while Brightsteel Protector is not the weakest of those 11, it is the one that I have seen the least uproar about. This card has seen play all the way back from beta with Shen Fiora until today with things like Elusive Rally playing it and Sivir Auction most famously. So the card has been around forever in all walks of life in Demacia, but I've never really seen an uproar about it. This is just one of those cards that players have always accepted as a core part of Demacia. No one's really ever suggested any nerfs for it. You're not seeing Reddit malding about this. When your opponent plays a Brightsteel Protector, you don't feel like they've done anything unfair. But I do feel like it is one of the most powerful cards in the region, and just wanted to give a shout out to this one. Coming in at number 10, we have another card that has seen play since the dawn of Runeterra in Green Glade Duo. Now, for those of you that weren't around during the beta days of Legends of Runeterra, we sort of had an elusive versus fearsome dichotomy going on for the early stages of the game. And Green Glade Duo is really the only elusive to make it out of things alive. There were many iterations of the deck, and many different nerfs happened as a result. I'm looking at you: Inspiring Mentor, Back-to-Back, Standalone, Kinku Lifeblade, Navori Conspirator, Solitary Monk. There were so many cards that got nerfed throughout the elusive archetype, but Green Glade Duo was never one of them. And it's one that people always saw as one of the more powerful options for the archetype, but it saw play back then in Freljord elusives and Demacia elusives. It saw play today in Elusive Rally, which has sort of been replaced by Yordles, but I'm sure that Green Glade Duo will find a spot in the future because it also fits into more aggro-y, combo-y decks like Azir Aurelia. There's really no stopping this card once it gets going, and the 1 health is deceptively hard to kill given the fact that this is an Ionia card, so we're giving the number 10 spot to Green Glade Duo. Coming in at number 9, we have a card that really does it all in TrollChan. While it's not as popular as some of these other cards, it's certainly nearly as powerful, just from the fact that it's 2 mana, the 4 attack swing on a combat, the fact that it can be used as protection as just a 2 mana Elixir of Iron, or take the attack off of an elusive or something that you can't block, or diversify where you are displacing the power within a combat. TrollChan is just one of the most versatile cards in all of Freljord. Now, I'm not just naming off staples of the region here. I'll tell you straight up that Avalanche is not on this list because I've never heard anybody say that Avalanche should be nerfed in the way that they have about TrollChan. Now, it's been a while since this card saw widespread play. We're not really seeing a lot of Freljord experimentation these days. It's more or less resigned to Frostbite midrange or the occasional Marauder list, which also more or less looks like Frostbite midrange, but even things like Frostbite Foundry have used this card in the past in conjunction with Elixir of Iron because they would just play 6 TrollChan if they could. While it's obviously the superior of the two, despite the fact that it is twice as much mana, TrollChan is definitely a staple of the Freljordian region and a core identity that isn't explored as often. It's not as flashy as something like Frostbite or as flavorful, but it's definitely going to get the job done. Coming in at number 8, we have a card so iconic the Mobalytics writing team named themselves after it. It's Glimpse Beyond. Now, when I was doing research for this video, one of the things that I did was went back and looked at very early patch notes to ensure that none of the cards that I had listed were buffed or nerfed and I had just forgotten about it. And in one of the very first balance patches, Glimpse Beyond was watch listed by the dev team as something that they really had their eyes on. See, back in beta, we didn't have a lot of options for removal, and Grasp of the Undying was a lot more popular than it is now, and anytime that that life gain was dodged by a Glimpse Beyond, it felt absolutely awful. And that is not an experience that went to the wayside as time went on. This is a card that is seen play in so many decks, and some of the most powerful decks in Legends of Runeterra. I'm talking about Go Hard. I'm talking about Thresh Nasus, in case everybody forgot about that short-lived little nightmare, where the fact that you were slaying your own units suddenly became extremely relevant. Now, while Glimpse Beyond doesn't have a sort of straightforward home these days, I guarantee you we're going to come back into a meta where 3 Glimpse Beyond is standard in a Shadow Isle deck, and Lord help us all when that happens. Speaking of Go Hard, coming in at number 7, we have one of the core cards of the original Go Hard lists, Zap Sprayfin. Zap is sort of like the Azure Drake of Legends of Runeterra in that it just does one too many things a little bit too well, between its elusive tag, its attune, the relatively solid body in a 2/2, and the fact that you can place a deck building restriction on yourself to really streamline the Zap Sprayfin, something that we have seen worked to great success at least 2 times with Pirate Aggro and Noxian Fervor, and of course the original Go Hard lists with Go Hard and Glimpse Beyond. Of course, that's why Glimpse is on this list, being able to rival the Go Hard in a Go Hard list, even when Pack Your Bags was 1 mana, as something that was so necessary to include that you were willing to dilute your Zap pool for it. Now, players also have another discussion that comes up every time we talk about Zap and nerfing it, because I've seen players ask for nerfs on all fronts of this card, but one of them is, what is an okay payoff for a deck building restriction? It seems like the players and Riot were in agreement that something like Crescendum was a little bit too easy. Boxtopus, Sparklefly, these other 2-drops that you pull out, it was a little bit too easy to only play 1 2-drop in your deck and get a payoff like Crescendum, but it seems like Riot has stayed on the side of, if you only want to play 1 spell that costs 3 or less, Zap Sprayfin is a good payoff card for that. Now, it's been a while since we saw something rise to the prominence that Pirates or Go Hard did because of Zap, but it's definitely possible that we'll have another spell come out in the future that Zap is a build around for. Now, I never said I wasn't going to put champions on this list, and that means at number 6 we have Gangplank, who to me holds a special place in my heart as a bit of a relic of an era that we seem to have moved out of, where we were just releasing generically good champions. RIP to Draven, who recently got the axe. When I think about new champions, and especially ones that came out in 2021, I think of like Senna and Vigar, who kind of have to be paired together and put in darkness. Rek'Sai and Pyke, who kind of have to be put together and put into Lurk. And while Gangplank and Sejuani do naturally fit together in that they share a level up condition as well as a pretty powerful deck in Plunder, Gangplank has been played in many different tier 1 decks throughout the years. I'm talking about Twisted Fate Gangplank, I'm talking about Pirate Aggro, I'm talking about Bandle Pirates, I'm even talking about OG Go Hard, which was Twisted Fate Gangplank Elise for quite a lot of players. He's just a champion that does something so straightforward that it can be a little hard to deal with. He's well statted, he's got that strong ability, and while there is a little bit of a deck building restriction to leveling him up, the decks that have included him tend to look pretty different from each other. Something like Pirate Aggro is never going to not play Gangplank, and it's also probably never going to level up the Gangplank. It just plays it as a 5/5 overwhelm unit that makes a keg. The fact that he does so many things so well and has never been the discussion of nerfs, at least on the Riot side, feels pretty good. Now, I think his high presence as of late has put him on the radar for a few players, but I think Gangplank should be safer than Draven was when we're looking at the Banhammer. As we approach the halfway point here at number 5, we have Ranger's Resolve. Now, this is a card where when it came out, Bannerman was getting very popular because it was released alongside the Scout keyword, Grizzled Ranger, Loyal Badger Bear, all these different kinds of things. And this is a card that feels good if you can play it as a Chain Vest. If you have a 1 unit survive 1 removal spell with Ranger's Resolve, you feel great. And then the top side of it is if you can get 4 or 5 units to survive a combat with your opponent or survive some kind of damage-based sweeper like Avalanche, the game just completely turns in your favor. And there are not a lot of 1 mana spells out there that are going to have the absolute game-swinging impact that something like Ranger's Resolve does. Now, I know that I said some of these cards have been talked about getting nerfed, and Ranger's Resolve was certainly a hot topic during its heyday right after Rising Tides released, but since then it's had a little bit of a layoff. You don't see this card in every meta, you don't see it in every Demacia deck. It's making a resurgence now in Yordle Rally, and I'm sure that some newer players are not going to be happy the first time that they try to line up a board parodied block and suddenly have their opponent win out completely and have 4 more units survive than they did. But there's really not an elegant nerf for this, and I think that's one of the reasons that it has remained as it has for so long, but definitely one of the strongest cards that Demacia has to offer in the right scenario. At number 4, we have Sharpsite. One of the most hotly debated nerf topics in recent weeks has been Sharpsite, the straightforward +2/+2 you can block elusives, burst speed. Players talking about taking the attack off this card, the health off this card. Don't let it block elusives. But I think that it is one of those hallmark cards of a region in a similar way that Twin Discipline is for Ionia and Make It Rain is for Bilgewater. And Riot just seems to really like leaving these strong, solid 2-mana cards in the region that happen to do something in combat, and Sharpsite is that for Demacia. It's going to see play in every kind of Demacia deck, be it mid-range, control, combo, aggro, it doesn't matter. Sharpsite fits into all of them. And the thing that I've always appreciated about this card is sort of the flavor of it. There's a keyword in card games called evasion. You know, players will talk about it in terms of drafting a lot. You know, you need a little bit of evasion. And that usually refers to something like elusive or fearsome. And Sharpsite, you know, you throw it onto any unit with one attack and suddenly you can block fearsome. You throw it onto anything and it can block elusives. And it really stops the evasion in a way that only a straightforward and righteous region like Demacia can. And I always thought that was really cool. As a card, I hate it, man. I'm just trying to get in with my elusives. I'm trying to play an uninteractive game plan, and here comes Sharpsite blowing everything out of the water. It's so efficient for the mana that it does, similar to TrollChan, because it can upreach in a way that TrollChan cannot. You know, you have a 2-attack unit attacking into a 4-attack unit. TrollChan's not going to get you out of that one. At least it's not going to kill the opposing unit in the way that Sharpsite will. It's about more sort of trading in battle than being sneaky. You know, that's the thing about Demacia. They're not sneaky. They're straightforward to a fault, and Sharpsite does embody that very well. It's very flavorful. It's also very broken. We're on to the heavy hitters. We're on to the top 3, and what would the top 3 be without Zoe? Now, while cards like the Serpent were nerfed, that's not something that's actually directly tied to Zoe, so I'm not counting it. If Super Cool Star Chart had been nerfed, then maybe I'd think about excluding Zoe from this list, but neither Zoe nor her champion spell have ever actually been changed, and that is a very hot topic, especially when she initially came out and was seeing play in both Invoke and Lee Sin. There was the Ruben pile, but really, even Zoe has had sort of less of a breadth of deck diversity than something like Gangplank has, but she's very, very good for what she wants to do, sort of having this mini game alongside her, where when you level up, you feel like you get to win the game, and I think a lot of players have been surprised at how easy it is to level up Zoe for a 1-mana 1/1. The elusive keyword, that evasion that I was mentioning earlier with Sharpsite, just makes it really easy to send her into combat consistently. She's a self-fulfilling prophecy with these star charts and getting cards and fixing your hand. Zoe really does it all, and I think players are a little surprised that she hasn't seen play in, 20 different tier 1 decks, but Zoe Lee Sin has been the longest standing good deck in Legends of Runeterra. You'll hear me say it all the time on broadcasts. Zoe Lee Sin is the one deck that is topped every seasonal in the Americas, and Zoe is a key piece of that. When you don't find Lee Sin, Zoe is the win condition that you need to play towards, and I think a lot of people have been surprised at how viable of a win condition it is to play towards. You don't need to build a deck around this like you would something like Pursuit of Perfection, where you need to play 20 cards over the course of the game to get your giant, fuck off cat robot. Zoe leveling will effectively end the game, even if you don't have a lot of payoff for it. There's really not much payoff for a Zoe level in a Lee Sin deck. It's really just giving things elusive by playing another Zoe, or the lifesteal that comes with the Dragon Links. We're not really seeing any, dedicated Zoe decks where we're like, oh, we're just gonna, like a Zoe Victor thing, like, oh, I'm just gonna throw a bunch of keywords onto all my units, everybody gets augment. Nothing like that, and it's fine. Zoe is just so consistently good in so many different things, and there's really not enough good things that I could say about this. I'm gonna cut it off here, but you know that Zoe deserves a top 3 spot. See, even Google knows that the number 2 spot belongs to Ravenous Flock. While Zoe is cool and all, Ravenous Flock has been hard carrying the Noxus control archetype for quite some time, giving us a lot of iconic decks like Twisted Fate Swain, Twisted Fate Gangplank, and of course, Draven Ezreal. Without Ravenous Flock, there's no Draven Ezreal. And Swain has seen play in the past solely so that you could get more copies of Ravenous Flock into your deck when players were sort of first figuring out Draven Ezreal, or maybe it was like the mid-level adaptations and Swain started coming in and out of the deck. Part of it was so that you could get more flocks instead of more whirling deaths or more mystic shots from the Ezreal, whichever champion you decided to cut. 1 mana, deal 4 damage to a stunned or damaged unit. There's a little bit of counterplay to this. You can heal the unit up, but if your opponent redamages it after you healed it, because you probably healed it at burst speed, there's nothing that you can do. The flock is coming down, and this little bird has spawned many a nightmare. If you just do a quick little Google about Ravenous Flock, you will find so many different complaints from so many different mediums. I remember watching, I don't remember who it was, but it was somebody's Twitter video. They're like a host for something esports related, and they were like playing LOR on their phone, and they got so angry at Ravenous Flock that they felt the need to make a Twitter video about it, and it was the funniest thing, man. This card is just an absolute nightmare. The ominous looking crow is as scary as it should be. Ravenous Flock, easily the #2 most powerful card that has never been nerfed. Before we get into number 1, I need to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Boulevard. I'm doing the YouTube thing. I need you to like, comment, subscribe, push those buttons, give me engagement, algorithm, all that stuff. Let's get into number 1. I watch a lot of top 10 lists. I know how it is. You've been thinking about Eye of the Dragon since the moment you clicked on this video. You wanted to see where it was placed. We got to the top 3. You didn't see it because it's number 1. Eye of the Dragon. While Ravenous Flock carries Noxus Control, Eye of the Dragon carries Ionia. Now, sure, it doesn't find its way into the elusive aggro builds of Ionia, but that's kind of like the Staten Island of Ionia. That's not where the cool kids hang out. The rest of it, though, that's all Eye of the Dragon. As I mentioned with Zoe, Lee Sin has been the most consistent deck across the history of Legends of Runeterra in the competitive space, and that is due largely in part to the unchanged nature of Eye of the Dragon. And we have fallen into this pattern every seasonal where Lee Sin's play rate skyrockets. People lose to Eye of the Dragon. They complain about it on Twitter. How are we going to nerf this card? Do we take the attune off of it? Do we lower its health a little bit? The fact that it's in Ionia and has so much inherent protection within the region certainly doesn't help. And then when you add in the cantrips of Targon, forget about it. Eye hasn't seen play in a lot of decks over the course of its lifespan. It's really just been Lee Sin, a little bit of Karma Ezreal, now Canon Ezreal, but it's not. There's not an insane amount of Ionia control decks, right? It's really just the Targon and the Piltover and Zon ones that we've seen, because it does have a pretty hefty deck building restriction to really make use of it, in the fact that you have to play 2 spells every turn. The problem with Eye and what makes it feel so powerful is that in the decks where it is easy to make Eye work, oh boy is it easy to make it work, especially with something like Gifts from Beyond, Crescendum. The old Lee Sin decks used to play Eye of the Dragon, but they would also play Mountain Goat and Sparklefly and all these other things. Once we really started to get that Gifts from Beyond into Crescendum, it was game over. That was no longer a Lee Sin deck, it was an Eye of the Dragon deck. And I think there's absolutely no debate that this is the most broken card in LOR that has never been nerfed. Now, is that to say that it should be nerfed? Not necessarily. I actually really like Eye of the Dragon, but it is certainly one of the hottest topics, and every time we are getting close to a balance patch, you will hear aggro, control, mid-range players alike say, hey, let's talk about Eye of the Dragon. But that is it. That is my number 1 pick. Not going to take too long on the outro here, but that was my top 10 untouched cards in Runeterra, sorting them by power of cards that have never been nerfed or buffed. Give me a follow on Twitter at casterboulevard, and I'll be making more of these top 10 lists in the future, because I really like arbitrarily ranking things, because I watch a lot of Watch Mojo. My monkey brain really likes sorting things into tier lists. If you like tier lists, by the way, every Friday, Tournament Tactician, tournament tier lists, that's all I tweet about really, is tournaments and Legends of Runeterra. You don't got to worry about my personal life. That's not on my Twitter. It's all Runeterra, baby. So, until next time, my name is Boulevard. Thank you for watching. And of course, let me know if there's anything that you think I missed. If you're very passionate that number 7 and 5 should have been swapped, let me know in the comments below.